Starting from the 1960s, the Republic of Korea was the scene of one of the most dramatic transformations any nation has ever experienced. After 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, a bloody civil war that marked the first clash of the Cold War, and a brief democratic interregnum, what is commonly known as South Korea would begin its transition from underdevelopment to prosperity, moving from an agricultural economy to an industrialized and technologically innovative one. The architect of this process has a name, Park Chung-hee, a figure who to this day sparks the most heated debates among his compatriots. Depending on who judges him, he was either a modernizer and a great statesman, or rather a ruthless man in his ambitions who built an autocratic regime. The truth is that when he seized power through a coup d'etat in 1961, South Korea was a poor and isolated country, even more so than its red neighbor to the north. But after his term ended, its GDP per capita would increase by more than 2,000%, exports multiplied by 100, and the average annual growth was over 9%. In defiance of prevailing economic theories, the series of measures implemented by President Park Chung-hee were marked by strong state centralization and the imposition of military discipline. The result is the so-called miracle on the Han River, which forms the foundation of the peninsular nation's success, now standing as the world's 10th largest economy after having climbed from the 180th position. Today we will present this story as a reference for the present. This is Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is the new encyclopedia, and I invite you to give us great support by liking this video and leaving your comments, which we always read. By clicking the bell for notifications, of course subscribing to the channel and sharing it with all your contacts on social media, on WhatsApp, and anywhere else. Without further ado, let's start with today's story. Born in November 1917 in the city of Gumi, Park Chung-hee was the 7th child of a humble farming family. As a young man, he worked for a short period as a teacher before enrolling in the Xinjiang Officer School to join the army. Isperio of Manchukuo, or the state of Manchuria, which was a puppet state of Japan, located in Japanese-occupied China. Ambitious and determined, at that time, he considered Napoleon his hero. He would discover his true calling in the military world after a rather mediocre performance in the academic field. After graduating in 1942 as an officer at the top of his class, he moved to Tokyo to join the Japanese Military Academy, from which he graduated in 1944. It was during this period that he met most of his fellow conspirators in the 1961 coup, receiving a classical Japanese martial education and developing a pronounced Japanophilia. Japanophilia, that is, a kind of love for everything that represents Japan, characterized by his admiration for the Meiji Restoration, which was the regime under which Japan opened itself to Western influence. Towards the end of World War II, Park is sent to the 8th Manchurian Infantry Corps as a second lieutenant. When Korea is liberated from the Japanese, he travels to Beijing, where hundreds of his compatriots form the Korean Liberation Army. In 1940, he joins the second class of the new Korean Military Academy. 2 years later, a decisive moment would occur in his life. A brutal uprising shakes Korea in protest against the partition of the country agreed upon by the United States and the Soviet Union. The uprising is suppressed, leaving tens of thousands dead. Inhabitants of Jeju Island, spurred on by the pro-communist Workers' Party, which Park himself supported, declare a general strike. Amid the government's campaign of repression to contain the subversion, numerous military personnel are purged, and the name of Park Chung-hee appears connected to a leftist cell. Although the specific connection of that cell is never proven amid all these events, Park Chung-hee is sentenced to death. The sentence is later reduced to 20 years in prison. For reasons that are difficult to determine, although it is suggested that his superiors held him in high regard and intervened on his behalf, Park ultimately ends up being released in exchange for exposing some of the clandestine activities of the Workers' Party. Shortly after, as a civilian, he takes on a position as Director of Intelligence and Operations at Army Headquarters. Park would always deny any improper association, but because of what happened, both internally and in the eyes of his international allies, he would have to prove with particular vehemence that he was a reliable man in the fight against communism. With the outbreak of the Korean War in 1951, one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, where he fought, the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, supported by the United States and other countries, against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union. Park Chung-hee is reinstated in the army. Surprisingly, he is appointed major only 14 months after being detained. For his bravery on the battlefield, he receives the Order of Merit 3 times, in the years 1950, 1951, and 1952. He stands out among the officers of the Western-backed side. His party background is set aside, and for someone his age, he is promoted to the rank of colonel. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the Korean Army was divided into 3 major groups based on the regional origin of its members: the Northeastern Group, the Northwestern Group, and the Central Southern Group. Within these groups, there were also subdivisions based on military academies. Park, although he was originally from the South, maintained very good relations with the leaders from the Northeast, since they had been his classmates at Shinhin. The union of officers from this region with those from the South, together with the contacts that Park had forged during his time in intelligence, would become the central block of the coup efforts. The idea of a conspiracy had been brewing in his mind since 1956, when Syngman Rhee committed fraud to get himself re-elected as president. However, it would not be until 1960 that he finally convinced himself to take up arms. In that year, the students took the initiative for regime change ahead of the military in response to a second fraud by Syngman Rhee. The streets were taken over and the government responded swiftly. 183 protesters are killed in a single day under pressure from the Liberal Party.
Syngman Rhee renuncia y
Union F, Police Violence European, the State Angeles, Citizens. In that, the Second Republic was established under the government of Chang Myung, who, although elected prime minister through a democratic process, soon presided over a government marked by corruption and inefficiency. The climate of social discontent is widespread. In general terms, this is the context in which 3,000 officers take the city of Seoul. Once the irreversibility of the coup, led among others by Park Chung-hee, was demonstrated and faced with the problem of legitimacy, Park sought 2 sources of support, that of the sitting president and that of the United States government, in the person of the Secretary of State. To win popular support, he seeks to win over the masses through strong economic performance. The newly formed governing junta seeks to send a clear message by issuing a statement of intentions consisting of 6 points. Among them were respect for the UN Charter, opposition to communism, and the commitment to transfer power to competent politicians within a reasonable period of time. In this way, it distances itself from any association with the Soviet bloc and even with the non-aligned countries, in favor of continuing and deepening collaboration with the United States. It should be kept in mind that South Korea was the largest recipient of foreign aid from the Americans, but this aid was mostly concentrated on consumer goods and military assistance. Despite this, and in the midst of pressing needs, Park always thought long-term, something that is reflected in the following phrase, open quote, "What Korea needs is not sacks of sugar, but bricks to rebuild itself," close quote. His great challenge was to obtain resources to boost seriously neglected areas. And for that purpose, he always preferred loans managed by his government rather than direct investments from foreign companies. True to his nationalist instincts, he believed that this strategy allowed him to give up less sovereignty. The military is guided by the goal of industrializing South Korea. In his view, the post-war democratic experiment had failed to create a viable nation, resulting not only in poor material outcomes but also in spiritual degradation, with a cult of foreign things. In his memoirs called The Country, The Revolution, and Park claims that it was not until he came to power that he was able to see just how bad the Korean economic situation really was. To achieve the much-desired industrialization, drastic measures were taken. More than 50 of the main owners of chaebols, which are a type of family-owned business conglomerate, were imprisoned on charges of illicit enrichment, which range from the discretionary allocation of public contracts to excessive profit margins. The enrichment.
La asignación discrecional de contratos con dinero público hasta los márgenes de ganancia excesivos.
It was such that the owner of Samsung, who had escaped arrest only because he was traveling in Tokyo, offered to donate his entire fortune to the Supreme Council for National Reconstruction. Both he and the rest of the major businessmen were tasked, through force and intimidation, with developing the country's productive capacities. And over time, they would become part of the 4 actors that served as pillars of the new regime, along with the state, the technocrats, and the small landowners. Already in the first year, Park established himself as the undisputed leader, purging several of the coup leaders, including General Chan Do-yong, his chief of staff, and the man who had helped him rise militarily in his youth. Under pressure from the Kennedy administration and in fulfillment of the junta's promises, elections were held in 1963. After many conflicts, the civilian opposition attended united as a bloc. Despite this, Park, who had faced internal pressure not to run as a candidate, was declared the winner by just over 1 percentage point. The closely contested race was widely considered clean. It was from this point that N became the undisputed leader of his life, became the undisputed junta, in the second leader, junta. Undisputed of N, in the third year, undisputed of became undisputed. N essentially amounted to a combination of state dirigism with the Japanese ethos. For Park, economic growth and national security were inseparable matters, since the possibility of an invasion from the north was constant, amid still lukewarm relations. With the United States, the general travels to West Germany, where he secures urgent financing in exchange for sending workers, such as miners and nurses. Park is very impressed with the German highway system and sets out to replicate it in the connections between cities like Seoul. It wasn't until 1964, with Lyndon Johnson in the White House, that relations with the United States really took shape, starting with the agreement to deploy thousands of South Korean troops in the Vietnam War. Since then, the North American superpower would serve as a brake on its more radical ambitions. Beyond all his merits, it should be noted that the South Korean leader benefited from a favorable global context during the most institutional stage of his term. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade eliminated most of the trade barriers of developed countries, favoring the import of products. There was also a boom in commercial banks, which were key in obtaining loans for countries in the process of developing their electric industry. As if that weren't enough, the Japanese, with whom relations would be normalized in 1965, were granting technology licenses within the framework of the Flying Geese model, the division of labor in East Asia. Park Chung-hee concentrated power in the executive, looking disdainfully at democratic processes with their slow and complicated legislative procedures. In his view, South Koreans should limit themselves to copying the Western democratic form without trying to transplant its content. This was put into practice from the beginning, but it was from 1972 that it took a classic authoritarian turn. He filled a third of the National Assembly with hand-picked representatives. Then he dissolved it and got rid of presidential candidates. A new Magna Carta is drafted and approved in a referendum with 90% of the votes, paving the way for him to have an imperial and lifelong presidency. This is how the period called Yushin was born, which roughly translates to renewal or rejuvenation, clearly referring to the Japanese Meiji Restoration. Some scholars have even suggested that Park modeled this Fourth Republic after the Yui Kim Il-sung's regime in North Korea. He sought to negotiate the reunification of the two Koreas from a position of strength. The 1970s were a period of anxiety and turmoil for Park. Improvements in the standard of living brought about a growing public awareness of political rights, which sparked significant protests. In 1972, Nixon's approach toward China led him to strengthen South Korea's military power, with the idea that he could not rely even on his closest allies to guarantee the peace and stability of his nation. In 1974, he suffered a failed assassination attempt in which his wife was killed. Naturally introverted, Park became even more isolated after that event. In 1978, he lost the legislative elections, the only adverse result he had received from the polls up to that point. However, the strong economic performance did not let up. For example, heavy manufacturing exports rose by 28% per year during the decade, and real wage growth increased by almost 20%. Between 1976 and 1979, a record within industrial revolutions, South Korea is fully entering a favorable path. Having suffered numerous attempts on his life, including an assault on the Blue House, which caused more than 30 casualties, Park Chung-hee dies at the hands of one of his own men, Kim Ha-yoo, who was the head of the South Korean intelligence agency and in charge of his security. 2 shots in an official setting, one below the ear, and another in the stomach are enough to accomplish the deed. The episode, which put an end to 18 years of government, is still a subject of speculation and controversy today, especially since it cannot be framed as part of a large-scale conspiracy. Officer Kim, the perpetrator of the assassination who ends up being tortured and executed, would insist that he acted in accordance with his patriotic duty. Unlike other anti-communist authoritarian leaders, General Park did not see himself as just a conservative or as a restorer of order who would revive past glories. He saw himself as the leader of a revolution, the father of a new country. He was convinced that he was inaugurating the greatest era in the 5,000 years since the founding of Korea. He was not nostalgic, but an innovator who believed that Korean history was marked by untapped potential. Before his administration, few people, except for scholars and academics, attributed a unique character to Korean society and to its way of life, which had always been under the shadow of the Chinese and the Japanese. His supporters place him alongside the great modernizers of the 20th century, such as Ataturk or Lee Kuan Yew. And it has even been suggested that his model served as inspiration for Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up, which has allowed China to lift 800 million people out of poverty. His critics, on the other hand, accuse him of having put an end to an emerging democracy in favor of repression and dictatorship. The general was a multifaceted and contradictory man. He declared himself a nationalist but made major concessions to the United States. He was trained on the left but ended up violently breaking away from it. He made it almost a taboo and relentlessly persecuted progressive dissent. He laid the foundations for a thriving liberal society, one of the few in Asia, using illiberal means. Thank you all very much for watching this video. I remind you that you give us great support by leaving your comments, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This was Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking to you. This is the New Encyclopedia. As always, we thank you for all your support and many blessings to you all.